Hi everyone, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now, what can Coca-Cola teach us about how to better save wildlife in Australia and beyond? And why should more governments set up charitable foundations to protect their national parks and threatened wildlife? Now, we discussed these and many other issues with today's inspiring guest, David Goldman. Now, David is the Chief Marketing and Revenue Officer at the Foundation for National Parks and Wildlife, or the FNPW, in Australia. A truly innovative model, the FNPW is the charity partner of Australia's government with a mission to safeguard their wilderness and wildlife for future generations. Now, to date, they've grown over 500,000 trees to help bushfire-affected areas and also invested over 60 million to purchase land and create more national parks since 2000, to name just a few impacts of their fundraising activities. Now, David is an experienced director with a demonstrated history of working for both the corporate and the not-for-profit sectors, and has been described as having a passion for doing things differently, which we drill into in this podcast. Now, in this episode, David shares his career journey from marketing for Coca-Cola and News Corp to now working for a conservation charity. And he discusses the importance of conservationists like you and I communicating better the benefits of wildlife for people. Finally, he also shares his advice for people like you who might be seeking to follow in his footsteps, along with his thoughts on how charities could achieve greater impacts in their work. And now, as always, it's a wide-ranging, career-boosting and wildlife-conserving chat. Enjoy.
So, hi, my name is David Goldman. I'm the Chief Marketing and Revenue Officer at the Foundation for National Parks and Wildlife in Sydney, Australia.
Right. Well, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us, David. So let's start with the Foundation for National Parks and Wildlife. Tell us a bit about the organisation. So what is it? What's your purpose, your vision, your mission? How would you describe it to someone who's never heard of the organisation before that you work for?
Yeah, sure. So we're a very interesting organisation. We were founded just over 50 years ago by the New South Wales state government, one of the states of Australia. Our principal reason for being was to be the philanthropic arm of government for national parks and wildlife services. We've since grown that to be national and be the philanthropic arm, charity arm across Australia. So they set us up so that we could raise money to typically purchase land to create national park. And by doing that, we would be able to save threatened species in perpetuity, both flora and fauna. So still to this day, that's one of our key missions, which is growing the national footprint of national park, saving threatened species. And since some of the, more devastating climate events, in particular the 2019-2020 bushfires, we have a mission now to what we call healing our land, which is largely around planting trees in both bushfire and flood-affected areas, but also doing a bit of research in understanding what are the best trees, shrubs, plants that might be either fire or flood resistant, so that we can reduce the effect and reduce the impact of those devastating natural disasters.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I read something like 12 million hectares of national park were affected by the fires 2019, 2020. It's just staggering, like the scale of that impact.
Look, it's mind-blowing. 12 million hectares. It's reported to be over 3 billion animals lost. I was actually all the way over in New Zealand in 2019, January 2019, and I could smell the bushfires in New Zealand. And I was on a glacier, and we could actually see the ash come across and tarnish the glacier. That was the impact of those fires. It was absolutely devastating.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Perhaps before we get into some of the projects and programs and the recovery, and I like the word healing of what you're doing, within Australia, paint us a little picture, if you can, of like the uniqueness of Australian wildlife. Why should anyone care about wildlife and nature found in Australia?
Yeah, look, I guess the unfortunate fact is that Australia is one of the worst when it comes to indigenous threatened species, both flora and fauna. I think if you looked at a top 10 list, we're probably sitting at about number 2. What people don't understand is, I guess, through the last couple of 100 years, we've had the introduction of invasive species. And that's been one of the biggest limiting factors for this positive biodiversity that we're all thriving for. So we have the federal government issue a threatened species list. We've currently got more than 1,800 different flora and fauna on that threatened species list, including our world famous koalas. So it's extremely important. And a positive biodiversity is important for not just for beauty and aesthetics and for our future generations to enjoy. It's important for our own overall well-being. We're talking about a positive biodiversity that can sequester carbon, take carbon out of the atmosphere. We're talking about purifying air and water that we all breathe in and drink, and soil degradation. So very, very important to get this right.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the projects and programs? I mean, I've read that you've got hundreds of different projects across all your national parks across Australia, but are there any particular flagships or particular projects that stand out when you kind of think about some of the action that's happening on the ground to tackle whether it's invasive or bushfires or other threats to biodiversity in Australia?
Yeah, so we break our projects up into 3. Growing parks, saving threatened species, and healing our land. In terms of growing parks, in 2020, for example, we were part of a group that purchased 60,000 hectares of land in South Australia and created a new national park down there. And of course, with that comes the benefit of protecting the threatened species in South Australia. So those two are inextricably linked. Purchasing that land, which we do through the foundation, and we work with local Indigenous communities and local government through a process of handing that land back. It gets gazetted through Parliament, and then a national park is created, and we've protected that land in perpetuity. So that work is always ongoing. We're always working with different state governments to identify priority pieces of land to expand the national footprint. And by the way, we were one of 196 countries December last year at COP15 that signed up for the protection, the 30% protection of land and sea. So all the work that we're doing and purchasing this land and creating national park is actually benefiting that and working towards that bigger, broader goal, the 30 by 30 goal. The other, one of the other big pieces of work that we've got on since the 2019-2020 bushfires, we've pledged to plant 1 million trees in bushfire-affected areas. And what we've done through the support of a number of larger corporates is we've scaled up now 18, soon to be 24 local community nurseries, which are growing local provenance seed, endemic seed, and trees to be planted in bushfire and now sadly flood affected areas. So through that, the work that's important there is because we're sourcing local seed, we're giving that tree every chance. That tree is being grown in the right climate. We know the right time of the year to plant it. We monitor it. We look after it for at least 2 years. We say until it's grown to about 2 to 3 meters tall. But we're giving it every chance to succeed. And if we can, we're well on our way. We have that ambition to reach that ambition by the end of 2025. And to date, we've grown close to 600,000 trees, and we'll be planting those in those bushfire and flood affected areas. So there's some of the bigger projects that that we've got on, that we're working with a number of different groups, including local community groups and Indigenous groups, to make it happen. And I guess also importantly, because they're local community nurseries, there's an element of volunteerism as well, which enables a lot of people from that local community to participate and feel ownership to the work as well, and just enable them to feel proud of what's going on in their local community.
Yeah, and just sort of picking up that thread then of people within the organisation. How big is the Foundation for National Parks and Wildlife? Do you have an idea? You might not know the exact number, I get that, but how many people work for you, like payroll, maybe volunteers as well, if you've got an idea around that? And also, what are the different types of roles that people are playing? Because often people listen to this, they're often aspiring to work in the sector. What are the sorts of different roles that are available?
Yeah, so again, we're quite unique. We're actually the glue that holds it all together. So because we are the charity of government, we are the trusted partner of government. So what that means is we actually don't do the on the ground work.
Yep.
We contract the people to do that work. Particularly in times of natural disaster, when government don't have the time to go through a tender process and get in 3 different quotes, et cetera, they'll be able to grant us money, and we make that happen very, very quickly. Yep. So, for example, again, back in the Black Summer bushfire days, we had numerous volunteers turning up to the bushfires saying, "I'm here, I want to help, I want to save the animals."
Yep.
But those people weren't trained. And I don't know if you know or not, but not even vets are trained to go into bushfires to rescue animals. So we set up a program to train those vets. We had PPE, we had fuel for the volunteers, the local volunteers. We had water, different supplies, etc.
Yep.
So we're the ones that contract out the work, that are trusted by government, corporate, etc. And we bring it all together, we pull it all together. So within our office, we largely have project managers, most of whom are trained ecologists, and their expertise is either in flora or fauna. And then we have a larger admin team, but when I say large, we intentionally run at a very low FTE. And that's because the money that we raise, we want to put it towards the purpose. So currently we're running at 87%. So for every dollar that we raise, 87 cents is going to the purpose, and we're retaining only 13 to recover our overheads.
Yeah, that's a great model. It feels like, you said unique, it feels like a keyword actually, like, it feels quite unique and almost quite innovative for a government to have a charitable foundation raising the money to deliver things like, nature conservation. I might be wrong, but I can't think of many other examples of that within the world. I guess the question that's forming is, does the government still fund much of the nature conservation, and you're adding to that? So there's almost like different revenue streams coming through. So the taxpayer is already kind of paying some, but this is like an additional way of growing more impact by raising sort of the charitable. And is it unique, I guess?
Yeah, look, I think the model is unique. I know that there are different foundations around the world, but what sets us apart is that relationship with government. What tends to happen is the government will set aside a certain amount of money for a particular project, and that might be almost your seed capital to get the project happening. So it might be just that little bit of catalyst that you need to get the project happening. Then what we do with that is we build on top of that, and we go to our individual donors, our major donors, our corporate partners, etc. We say, we've got this great project happening, would you like to be involved? So the relationship with government is, one, to identify what the priority is, both at a state and federal level, and then to, they enable us to get the project started. So they'll grant us some money. Again, a very clever model, because financially, what we do is we take that money, we hold it in trust, we have that money sitting in our balance sheet, and we only release it to our P&L once the work is done. So again, for government, we're only releasing money once that work is done. So there's no waste. And that's very important for a government to know that, you know, they can trust us and enable that.
And also, I guess it's really good for donors because you already have what they call, I guess, co-finance. You already have some money in the bank, and that relationship you have with government gives them confidence that this work is going to happen. You know, so really, it's a bit of an open goal for many donors. Yeah,
absolutely, and often it's leverage. So we might have identified a piece of land that a state government has identified. There might be a price tag on it, and we'll go to donors and we'll say, we're going to kick in this much, government's going to kick in this much. It might be government might say, we'll offer you multiples of 3 to 1. So for every dollar that you raise, government will kick in another 3. But the price tag is $4 million. So, you know, therefore we need to raise $1 million and they'll give us 3. So it's good leverage with our donors to say, government's also playing their part, playing their role. And by the way, we're going to create a national park and we're going to save threatened species in perpetuity.
Yeah, and it can be gazetted straight away. I mean, it seems like such a great model. I'm surprised more countries don't use a similar sort of model. Yeah. Let's change gears slightly then. I'd love to talk about you and your work specifically, David. So you're Chief Marketing and Revenue Officer. What is your job? How would you describe your job? What does it entail? If you were talking to your mum or your best friend and they have no idea what you do, what would you describe a typical day, week, however you wish to answer that question?
Obviously the role has 2 parts with marketing and revenue. For me, the priority is revenue. Without the revenue, you know, let's call it a spade, we can't do the work that we want to do. We can't achieve the purpose, achieve the goals that we're looking for without the money. So largely my role is to oversee the fundraising from individuals, from monthly givers. As I mentioned, we've got major donors. We've got a section devoted to our corporate partners, as well as trusts and foundations. So on any given week, you know, I'm overseeing the fundraising, the philanthropic side of donors and corporate partners. On a marketing side, I think this is where it gets interesting, and particularly in the not-for-profit or the for-purpose space, we're not marketing or we're not advertising or promoting similarly to corporates or others that have much larger budgets. What we're really doing is we are promoting the impact that the donor money can have. And that's very important, because most people that will come to you are generous, and they're likely to give you money. And you know, we all know that the world's sort of suffering at the moment through harsher economic times. But if we can demonstrate the impact that we're having with their money, then we're going a lot further than we can. And so there's that beautiful sort of symbiotic relationship between my marketing team building and demonstrating the impact that the sales team can therefore go and sell and say, this is what we're actually doing with your money. And a lot of that involves measurement and working with other organizations, third-party verifiers of the work that we're doing. And that's something new. It's something that I think the world is slowly catching up on. You know, we know the TNFD is more recently looking at global impact measurements, and we're following those guidelines and principles. And if we're all working together and all measuring the same thing, then it's going to be a whole lot better for all of us in the sector, rather than fighting and competing for every dollar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Does your work from the marketing perspective, does it obviously involves communications and storytelling, and talking about the impact of what you're doing, Do you have, just internally, do you have a separate communications team doing that, or is that part of marketing? So I've seen different models where marketing and comms are together, or they're separate. Where do things sit on your side?
No, we intentionally bring it together.
Yeah.
Because we have one brand, which is our corporate name. And my preference is that it all sits together, and it's all synergistic in terms of the message, and getting one message out there. So yeah, comms is a big part of it. Storytelling is a big part of it. The on-the-ground project managers, they're continuously reporting back in terms of different local stories that they're hearing, and that might be visually or audio, etc. And yeah, it's our responsibility to pull all that together and to communicate that back out to our audience, who are largely donors.
Yeah, exactly. And it starts to then work towards donations and the revenue side of your role. When I think about your role and listen to what you're saying, some other job titles might be director of development, director of fundraising, those sorts of jobs. What are the highs and lows of your job? What do you love and what do you want to share? Perhaps the challenges or the bits you don't enjoy so much.
Yeah. Look, the highs are definitely the outcomes, and seeing the fruits of your labour. So a couple of months ago, I was fortunate enough to go out to one of our local community nurseries, spent some time with the local community nursery, and then the nursery manager took us 10 kilometres down the road to a wonderful property owner who owned acres and acres, had actually taken 800 trees from our local community nursery and showed us around his property that had been burnt and devastated by those bushfires. And we could now see, the trees in the ground. And we could see the direct impact that our money, our efforts, everybody's efforts, where they were going to. So I think the highs are always those. We've had other smaller little wins, like supporting UNESCO World Heritage listings for some of the national parks that we've purchased, and just recently the Gondwana rainforest in southeast Queensland was put on the World Heritage listing. One of the park that I talked about, where we purchased land in South Australia last year, we filled out a nomination for listing for UNESCO World Heritage listing. So when they happen, they're some of the highs. I think the lows, working in the sector, we're probably going for a bit of a low right now. As I mentioned, economic times, we're all facing it. We've got high inflation rates, high interest rates, high energy prices, etc. And our individual donors just cannot afford to give anymore. And sadly, week after week, we're getting phone calls where lovely, usually tend to be older people. So, probably more pensioners are ringing up and just saying, look, I've got to cancel my monthly giving program. I just cannot afford it anymore. It's heartbreaking. And, it's devastating. And, we're putting all this work into it, and we're trying the hardest we can to raise money to go to a good cause. But we're in this economic downturn that the world's in, that is making it really, really challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And that must be felt across the sector, I would think, across the world. Yeah. I did a bit of reading just before our chat about yourself on your website, largely. And it described you as having a passion for doing things differently, both in large corporations. We're going to talk about your career to date in a little while, and also in the not-for-profit sector. What approach do you bring to your work that's perhaps different to others? Like, what do you think is your sort of unique approach, and what can others learn from that, perhaps?
I think my unique approach would be, because I've had that corporate experience, I had 20 years in very large corporates, I bring a commercial approach to marketing and revenue and fundraising. So I'm continuously thinking about return on investment. And that's a corporate That's a corporate phrase. And for me to even utter those words in a typical fundraising organisation, it may be frowned upon. But I've got very, very limited budgets, and I've got very, very limited resource. So I've got to be very sure that if I'm putting $1 into something, I'm getting at least $5 back.
Yeah.
So part of my approach is to be very, very diligent around return on investment. Yeah. I guess the training that I've had is to be very factual and fact-based. When I'm talking to my CEO or I'm presenting to the board, I'm ensuring that whatever I'm saying, whatever program I'm putting forward, there's a large amount of fact behind it. And there's a large amount of evidence to suggest that it's going to succeed, because again, we are working with very, very small budgets, and we don't have the luxury of sort of a test and learn environment that a corporate might have, because every dollar is going to be scrutinized.
Yeah.
So I think that bringing that commercial lens across everything is something that, I enjoy. And it also provides, certainly in this space, it provides another avenue of raising revenue, because I'm able to sort of think of ideas or initiatives that might have a commercial return that aren't your typical fundraising type of initiatives.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, where I try and push the envelope a bit and push the barriers and see where it takes us.
Could you give an example of that? I mean, maybe perhaps you can't, and that's fine, but do you have any examples of the sorts of ideas you've had that perhaps more typical to the corporate sector, but you're applying within your current role?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to talk quite conceptually
of course,
at the moment, but we've got a project on at the moment where I'm looking to raise revenue from an alternate source that I know will work, because it's going to incentivize the federal government, because what we're looking to do is to develop a long-term sustainable revenue stream that will help us purchase more land and achieve the 30 by 30, thereafter by 2030. Yeah. The revenue stream is around carbon sequestration, right, and sourcing, properly accredited carbon credits, and using those carbon credits to pay for the work that we need to do. Yeah. And if there's any balance left over, we could sell those to corporates who are also looking for carbon offsets that don't necessarily have to go offshore for them. So the government's going to like that, because it'll probably involve just a tiny bit of money to get the project going, but it will be sustainable in that we're accruing carbon credits that we ordinarily would, or others would ordinarily do anyway, but we will use those carbon credits to pay for more work or to purchase more land. So there's a lovely sort of self-sustaining cycle happening that is going to lead us to the achievement of the 30 by 30 and by 2030.
Yeah, which I think, I mean, it's brilliant, and it's what it feels like more charities need to be using a more of a business corporate lens to their work, and innovating to find new revenue streams, particularly focused probably within the corporate sector, and sort of having more partnerships or more way of attracting funds which support and grow the cause. I mean, we talked on the podcast previously. Sorry, just to say that I think charities are often described as trying to save the world on their spare change. I kind of like that sort of phrase in a way, that I think relying just upon donations, and I say just, obviously it's so important. Charities do fantastic work, but finding these new ways of raising income to support our cause is so important, and corporate processes, that approach that you're bringing, feel really important.
Look, I think the small change, charities don't have that small change anymore, but neither do corporates. And gone are the days where you can rock up to a corporate, give them a great story, tell them who you are. They go, "Oh, fantastic, I love you. Here's $100,000. Yeah. Those days are over.
Yeah.
They want to see, where is their money going to? What's that return on investment?
Yep.
What impact are you creating? Oh, okay, that looks really interesting. Yes, you're potentially doing something that I need to do and achieve ESG targets as well. So all of a sudden, we've got a collaborative partnership where we can be helping the corporate with the achievement of their ESG targets, and obviously they can be helping us with, kickstarting and feeding the machine to plant more trees and sequester more carbon. So we've got a different conversation happening with the corporate than we would have 5-10 years ago, where we just rock up and say, this is the work we do. Isn't it great? Please help us out, with our outstretched hand. Those days are over.
Yeah. Are you excited about the future of financing conservation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can't come quick enough. And models that we're talking about are models for the future. And if we're talking about the future, it's very exciting.
Yeah, I feel that too. Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about your career to date then, if we can. We've touched on already, you've had an interesting 20-year corporate career. I've seen names like Coca-Cola and News Corp on your CV already. When you look back at your career today, what have been the kind of key stepping stones, milestones that have kind of perhaps on reflection got you to where you are now?
Well, I think Coca-Cola's started it all off. It was one of my first jobs at a university with a marketing degree. Bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, early 20s, and all of a sudden doing marketing for, at the time, the largest brand in the world. Not only exciting, but it attracted the most talented people, myself excluded. But what that meant was that I could obviously learn from the best. And I think that really laid the foundations. I talk about a fact-based marketing approach. That's what Coca-Cola taught me. I couldn't get in front of the senior management team without my facts straight. I would just be shot down in flames if I hadn't done that. So my training and the due diligence that I put into every project, I think really started back in the early days. Canon was an interesting one. So those were the days where iPhones hadn't yet come out, and we were still taking pictures with cameras. And if anybody remembers, the smaller digital cameras were all the go.
Yeah.
What was interesting there was it was really a race. It was a 2-horse race between Canon and Nikon. And year after year after year, different features would appear on the camera. So, more megapixels, different speeds, different lenses, etc. And I quickly came to the realization that feature-led marketing is not going to cut it. Because as soon as I say we've got a 12 megapixel camera, Nikon comes out and say, yeah, but we've got a 15 megapixel camera. So you had to start talking about the benefits for the consumer and be benefit-led rather than feature-led. And that's something that I've definitely taken into the not-for-profit space. And it doesn't matter where you are, what sort of sector, whether it's conservation or humanitarian aid, there are emotional benefits that not-for-profits deliver that have to be spoken about. That's the art of the storytelling. We've got to stir something up inside of somebody. I can't just tell you that I'm going to plant 100 trees. I've got to tell you, why is that good for you or for your children or for future generations? What benefit am I delivering by planting 100 trees? So I think my career and my time at Canon definitely told me to stay away from features and stick to benefits and be emotionally driven. And then just making the transition into the not-for-profit world. You've got to be ready for it. You've got to go there for all the right reasons. I think people have got to identify what turns them on or what interests them, because you're not turning up to work for the same reasons as you are turning up in the corporate world. And so, when the alarm goes off at 6 a.m., you've got to spring out of bed and really enjoy what you're doing, because, and then be purpose driven, because that's what's going to get you out of bed, not the paycheck that you were getting in corporates.
What was your motivation to switch then? I'm obviously touching on that already, but like from a personal perspective, why did you decide to leave corporates and now work for a charitable foundation delivering wildlife conservation?
Look, I think I always had the motivation to be in the sector, but it wasn't right for me personally. And that's what I would suggest to people. They've got to find the right time. So, for me, throughout my corporate career, I had a young family. I had to establish that young family. I obviously, wanted to house them, provide them shelter, education, et cetera, et cetera. And then as soon as some of those, I guess, financial imperatives dissipated a little, then it was maybe time for me to look for something different. But the one thing that I did, I guess, to fuel my motivation for purpose was to do a lot of volunteer work when I was in these corporates. So I do. I volunteer at the local surf lifesaving club, for example, and I've done that for the last 12 years. I just needed an outlet to support my community, to do more than just, I guess the ordinary day to day. So that sort of started the for purpose work, and then when literally when I was financially able to and ready to, I was able to make that transition into the for purpose sector.
Yeah. Any regrets?
None at all. No, definitely not. Not looking backwards.
Yeah, great. What advice would you give to someone who's listening who might be looking to do something a bit similar then? Perhaps they're already working in a corporate looking to switch their career. Or you can speak to early career conservationists too who are looking to secure land their first job. Have you got any advice for people listening that might be on that sort of path?
I think you've really got to identify what you love and what's your purpose. Like I said, what's going to get you out of bed in the morning when it's cold and dark and rainy and it's 6 a.m. and the alarm goes off. Identify that, I guess, first. Maybe people want to start volunteering first to get a taste for it, to get a feel for what the sector's like before they make the jump and the transition of a career move. And then on top of that, I think you've got to be fairly flexible and a bit malleable. You've got to work with a lot of different people. You've got to be very collaborative. It doesn't, again, the corporate space where it tended to be a bit siloed and a bit more aggressive, that doesn't work in the for-purpose sector. It's much more collaborative, even to the extent where I am talking to, what I would traditionally call my competitors. We are here to solve such big issues and such big societal issues that no one organisation can do it on its own. So we have to be collaborating. Other NGOs, we have to be talking to each other. We have to be talking to government together. We have to go with a unified voice. And that doesn't happen in the corporate world. It's corporate, it's cutthroat, it's do or die. And so, there's that element of flexibility and collaboration that you need to take on as well.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. And it can be the other way around, actually. People go from charity to corporate, which I've done myself. It can be a real shock to the system that we don't collaborate in a corporate environment and work with others. It can be real cutthroat. So, yeah, really interesting to kind of view it the other way too. It's been great talking to you. Thank you. I'd like to just wrap up with a few kind of more open questions just to kind of see how you sort of think, if that's okay. The first one is a nice, easy one. If we could take you to one place to see one species, where would you go and what would you like to see?
I've got a passion for under the water. So, take me 20, 30 meters under the water, in nice, beautiful, clear waters, potentially around beautiful coral, and let's go see some really colourful fish and marine life.
Fantastic. We'll even give you a scuba kit too, if you're lucky. So,
Thank you.
If we could make you a global czar for the day, okay, so you're going to rule over planet Earth and human beings on planet Earth, and you could enact one law, or one decree, or however you want to frame it, to help the environment in some way. What law or decree might you enact?
I think we've all got to contribute. It doesn't matter who we are or what we do. We all have to contribute to saving the environment. As humans, we have stuffed this place up tremendously, and we know that there's only limited time before things get a lot worse. There are major contributors to the degradation of the environment. They and us as individuals have to play a role. So I'd love to see that we are all contributing to the solution and not just creating the problem.
Yeah, I love that. So maybe enabling people to set aside a certain proportion of their time or their resources to tackling issues such as this. Yeah. Wonderful. Yep. A final question will be, we're seeing people like you and I and others are doing our best to tackle wildlife conservation issues around the globe, but we are sadly seeing a decline. Year on year reports and newspapers and whatever you want to look at, are talking about declines in wildlife. What do conservationists need to be better at or to do more of if we're really going to turn the needle, move the dial on this?
I think we've got to be better at telling the human story, the human side of this. I have a hypothesis that in times of need, let's look at COVID, let's look at extreme weather events, let's look at the war in the Ukraine. In times of need, humans respond to humans and respond to how humans are suffering the disaster. And that's right, and they should. And I'm very happy for people to put the human side of it as a priority. But then the longer term picture is, in the environment in particular, this is not about me or about you or, previous generations. This is about future generations. And, what world are we going to what planet are we going to leave behind for not just my children, but my grandchildren and their children? And if we're not telling a human story like that, then we're just not going to get there. It's not going to hit a chord. Look how long it took for a number of countries around the world to recognize that there is something called human-induced climate change and that it's real. It just took way too long, and it shouldn't have. The science was always there. But if we told the story, if we wrapped the story up in some sort of human picture, and demonstrated the devastating effects that it's going to have for our children, maybe people would have listened a bit earlier.
Yeah. David Goldman, it's been really nice to talk to you. Thank you for coming on the podcast. If people want to find out more about what you do and perhaps specifically support the Foundation for National Parks and Wildlife, where should they go?
Yeah, come straight to our website, FNPW. So it's the acronym for Foundation of National Parks and Wildlife, fnpw.org.au.
Perfect. We encourage everyone to do that. We'll put it in the show notes as well and a link to you as well. Thank you again, David.
Yep, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review because it really helps us to get in front of more people, and we really enjoy reading them all. As you'll have heard, our podcasts are now recorded in front of a live audience who sit in and listen to the chat, and then after the mics are turned off, they get a chance to talk to the host, to share their thoughts, and also to ask questions. It's a really great format. If you'd like to be in the audience, all you need to do is join the Conservation Careers Academy. Now, in the Conservation Careers Academy, you'll get full access to the world's biggest conservation job board, listing over 15,000 jobs, volunteer and internships across the globe each year. You'll also enjoy access to our amazing CC Pro private members community with regular events, networking and support. Plus, you'll get full access to our growing library of career boosting resources, guides and templates. And best of all, it only costs a few dollars, euros or pounds per month to join the Academy. Now, to find out more, please visit conservation-careers.com/academy or simply click the join button at the top of our website. See you on the inside.